am Emily, 32 years old, living alone in a small apartment in Seattle. It's nothing extravagant, just enough space to breathe and think. My job? Freelance graphic designer. The kind of work that doesn't make me famous but pays the bills. It's the perfect blend of quiet independence, but if I'm being honest, sometimes it feels like I'm just going through the motions. I don't chase big dreams or expect grand things to happen, and that's fine, or at least I tell myself it is. I work from home most days, designing logos, websites, branding for businesses that probably don't even remember my name after they get what they asked for. The type of work that's satisfying in its own way, but not the stuff that lights up your soul. I've come to terms with it. There's peace in knowing exactly where you stand, and for me, that peace is in this small, quiet apartment, with sunlight filtering through the curtains on a good day, and rain pattering against the window when it's gray outside. I have 2 close friends, not many, but enough, the kind who don't push me to open up more than I'm ready to, and we don't ask too many questions about each other's lives, which is fine by me. I've always kept to myself. It's not that I don't care. I do. It's just easier to live quietly, to not ask too much, expect too much. And, after all, I've had my share of disappointment. My mom passed away when I was 12, and after that it was just me and my dad, David. He tried his best, but we both knew that losing her had changed us in ways we couldn't fix. A few years later, my dad remarried, Margaret, and she brought along her daughter, Nina, my half-sister. Nina was 5 years younger than me. I was 15 at the time, too old to need a mother figure, but still, I wasn't prepared for how it would feel to have someone else suddenly come into the family. Nina never really seemed to understand what it was like to lose someone as deeply as I had. She called Margaret Mom almost immediately, and I tried not to let that sting. I didn't say anything, I just watched quietly. It felt like she was carving out a space for herself in our home, a place that was no longer just mine, but I never complained. I wasn't the kind of person who did that. I learned early on to accept things as they were, even if it meant accepting that I didn't really belong. As the years went by, I grew accustomed to being the outsider in my own family. Nina and my dad had a bond that I could never quite be a part of, but I didn't let it show. I didn't let them see how much it hurt to be on the outside, how much I longed for a sense of connection that I never quite got. It was just easier to keep my head down and smile, to keep it all inside. But something happened one afternoon that changed everything. I was scrolling through Instagram, and there it was, Nina's bridal shower. I froze. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over my phone. There she was, Nina, dressed in white, laughing with her friends, champagne glasses raised high. The caption read, "Bridal shower for the bride-to-be, Nina Voss." I blinked. Twice. 3 times. No invite? Not a single mention. I wasn't included. I put my phone down slowly, trying to convince myself that this was some kind of mistake. Maybe the invite got lost. Maybe I hadn't been included because I'd been out of touch. Maybe... But no, deep down I knew. I'd been left out. I grabbed my phone and typed a quick message to my dad, trying to stay calm. "Hey, I just saw something about Nina's bridal shower. Is she getting married?" The message delivered, but the 3 little dots that usually indicated a reply never appeared. I waited. An hour passed, then 2, still nothing. I called, straight to voicemail. I sat there, my chest tightening, the weight of it all pressing in. This wasn't the first time I'd been excluded from family events, but this one hit harder than the others. Birthdays, holidays, dinners, they all came and went without a word from them. But this was a wedding, a milestone in Nina's life, and I wasn't even worth a mention. I sat in silence, the walls of my apartment closing in around me, feeling smaller than I had in years. Was this really happening? 3 days later, I received a message from Nina. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. The words were blunt, cold. Don't worry about the wedding. You're not invited. You're not really family, Emily. I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. I read it again, and then again, as if the meaning would change if I just kept looking at it. You're not invited. You're not really family. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I sat there for a long time, the phone in my hand frozen. My tea had gone cold. I didn't even remember setting it down. The walls of my apartment, which had always felt like my sanctuary, suddenly felt suffocating. I couldn't believe it. I had always known that I wasn't the first priority in this family, but this was a rejection so final, so clear, that it felt like a slap across my face. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But I didn't, not yet. I was too numb. Instead, I walked over to my bookshelf and picked up a photo frame I hadn't touched in years. It was an old picture of my mom, her soft smile still warm even though she had been gone for so long. "Did you see this coming, Mom?" I whispered to the photo, my voice breaking. I didn't know if I was asking for answers or if I was just venting the pain that had started to crack me open. I stared at the photo, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Just the silence, and the weight of Nina's words still ringing in my ears. That night, lying in bed with the lights off, memories flooded my mind. I thought of every single dinner I had been left out of, every birthday that passed without me, the times I called and could hear Margaret's voice in the background, cutting our conversations short. And now this, the final blow. I thought of Nina as a little girl crawling into my bed late at night, asking me to tell her stories. I had done everything for her, everything. But now none of that seemed to matter. I closed my eyes, willing myself to sleep, but it felt impossible. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I saw her face. Nina, laughing with her friends at a bridal shower that I wasn't invited to. The next morning, I found myself staring at my phone, unsure of what to do. I could have ignored the message, kept swallowing the hurt like I always did. But something in me cracked. I couldn't just let this go. I texted a former coworker who still had ties to Margaret's circle. "Hey, just saw something about Nina's wedding. Is she really getting married next month?" The reply came almost instantly. "Oh yeah, Nina's wedding is next month. Didn't you know? Everyone's talking about it." Everyone knew except me. I should have stopped there. I should have kept my mouth shut and let it go. But I didn't. Instead, I waited for my father's reply, hoping for some kind of explanation, some sign that this was all just a misunderstanding. But I knew it wasn't. The silence that followed was louder than any response he could have given. 3 days passed, and I couldn't shake off the weight of Nina's message. It wasn't just the rejection. It was the finality of it. "You're not really family." Those words echoed in my mind every time I tried to go about my day, every time I picked up my phone or looked out the window. I tried to distract myself with work, but it felt hollow. Everything seemed hollow. I made some designs, emailed a few clients, but my mind kept wandering back to that moment when I read her message. Then, 3 days after that, my phone buzzed again. It was from Nina. I stared at the screen for a moment, holding my breath before I opened it. The message was short, cold, as if she had typed it in the few seconds it took for her to check her phone, barely giving it any thought. "Hey Emily, don't worry about the wedding. You're not invited. You're not really family." It was the same message as before, just a second-hand repetition. It made my stomach churn. I reread it once, twice, 3 times. How could she say that to me? How could she treat me like I wasn't worth anything more than a cold text message? It was as if I had never mattered at all. The worst part? There was no apology, no explanation, just dismissal. I was nothing more than an inconvenience, an afterthought. Someone who didn't belong in the narrative of their lives. I stood up from the couch, my legs unsteady, and walked slowly over to the bookshelf. I reached for the old notebook that had been my mother's, a journal where she used to write down recipes, random thoughts, and bits of advice. I had kept it all these years, even though it didn't make sense to hold on to something that reminded me of a life that wasn't mine anymore. I flipped it open to the first page and ran my finger over the words my mother had written. "The family you build matters, more than the one you're born into." I didn't understand it when she wrote it. I thought she was talking about the future, about what I would create for myself, husband, kids, a house. But now, reading it again, it hit me. She wasn't talking about the future. She was talking about survival, emotional survival. I closed the notebook slowly, feeling like I was holding something that wasn't mine to keep, and yet I couldn't let it go. I needed to process all of this, the hurt, the betrayal, the feeling of being erased. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all, but I wasn't sure how to breathe again. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling above me was too white, too bright in the dark. I kept replaying the message in my mind, each time hoping that somehow it would make sense. Maybe it was my fault, maybe I had done something wrong. Maybe if I had been more involved, they wouldn't have pushed me away. But I knew that wasn't true. They had already decided who mattered, and it wasn't me. I turned over, looking at the empty space next to me where my mom's photo had once been, the one I had pulled out earlier. It was like the space had gotten bigger, and I didn't know how to fill it anymore. That's when I realized I had spent my entire life trying to prove I was worth something to people who never even saw me. And I was tired of it. The next morning, after I got up, I did something I never thought I'd do. I reached out to my father. I sent a simple text, "Dad, I saw Nina's message. Why wasn't I invited? Why wasn't I even told about the wedding?" I didn't expect a reply. I didn't expect anything at all. But part of me still hoped that just maybe my father would explain. Maybe this was all a mistake. He responded an hour later. "I know things are tense between you and Nina, but this wedding is important. I'm not saying you're not family, but it's complicated. I hope you can understand." Complicated. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I was numb, but I felt anger start to build beneath it. Complicated? This wasn't complicated, it was clear. I put the phone down. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep begging for scraps of their love, their approval, not when they couldn't even give me the decency to be included in something as simple as a wedding invitation. That was it? I wasn't going to try anymore? It wasn't long after that exchange with my father that the call came. I didn't recognize the number, but when I saw it was from him, I knew. I almost didn't pick up. I wasn't ready for another round of excuses or condescension, but I answered, because part of me still wondered if this would be the moment he finally got it. "Hi, Emily." My dad's voice came through the line, hoarse, as if he had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times before. "Hey," I said, my voice flat. I couldn't bring myself to sound anything but tired. There was a pause, a few seconds of awkward silence, and then he cleared his throat. "Listen, I know things between you and Nina are strained. I understand that. But the wedding, it's expensive, and Margaret's been working really hard on everything. We've been struggling to cover the costs, and I know you're doing well in your career." I felt a chill creep up my spine. I knew where this was going. "So we were wondering if you could help us out. Just with some of the wedding expenses, the venue deposit, the flowers, it would really mean a lot, Emily." I could feel the words hit me like a punch to the gut. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "You want me to pay for the wedding?" His voice was careful now, like he knew this wasn't going to go over well. "It's not just about paying. It's about family. We're asking for support. I know you're upset, but this is bigger than that. It's about us being there for each other." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he ask me for help after everything that had happened? After Nina's message? After the way they had both erased me from their lives? I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm in my chest. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice low, my hands tightening around the phone. "You're asking me to pay for a wedding I'm not invited to, while you've made it clear I'm not part of this family anymore?" "Emily, it's not like that," my dad rushed to explain. "Nina's just emotional. You know how brides can be. We want to keep the peace." "The peace," I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You want to keep the peace by asking me to fund this wedding, this family event, while making it clear I'm not welcome?" There was another pause on the other end of the line. "Look, I know this is hard, but family steps up for each other. This is a time when we all need to come together." I almost couldn't hold back my anger anymore. "You mean like how you stepped up for me when Mom died? When I was left alone to deal with everything and you couldn't even see me? Or when you decided I didn't belong in your new family unit? Is that what you mean by family stepping up?" My dad didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear him breathing on the other end, but he didn't try to explain himself further, and I didn't need him to. "I'm done, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "I'm done trying to fit into a family that never wanted me to begin with. I'm not helping with this wedding, and I'm not going to pretend everything is fine anymore." Before he could say another word, I hung up. I sat there, holding my phone in my hand, staring at the blank screen. A calmness washed over me, but it was a different kind of calm. It wasn't peace, it was finality. I had made my choice. I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. I wasn't going to be the person they turned to when they needed something, only to be dismissed when I needed them. That was the breaking point. But that wasn't the end of it. Oh no, they didn't let it go that easily. A few hours later, I got another message, this time from Nina. It read, "Don't let your pride get in the way of family. You're part of the family whether you like it or not, and you should be there to support us." I felt my heart sink. She was still trying to spin it, still trying to make it seem like this was my fault. But I had already made up my mind. There was no going back. The next morning, I got an email from Margaret detailing the specific wedding expenses that they needed help with, as if it were a simple transaction. There were no apologies, no acknowledgement of the fact that they had made me feel invisible, just a line at the bottom. "We really need you, Emily. Family helps family." I didn't even read the email all the way through. I didn't need to. They were still trying to control the narrative, trying to paint me as the villain in this story. Instead, I went to my laptop, opened a new document, and typed a single sentence. "I'm withdrawing my support for the wedding." I didn't just pull the financial support they asked for. I withdrew everything. All the deposits. Everything I had agreed to fund. And I didn't stop there. I sent an email to the event coordinator for the wedding explaining that I was no longer involved and that I was withdrawing all the payments I had previously authorized. I included the details of the cancellation, the specific amounts, and made it clear that my decision was final. As I hit send on the email, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at them. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about not letting them treat me like I was nothing, like I was just a source of money to be used whenever it was convenient for them. The wedding was supposed to take place that Saturday. I had no intention of showing up, no desire to be a part of it, but the ripple effect of my decision to withdraw my support began to reverberate in ways I hadn't expected. The morning of the wedding, I woke up to a buzzing phone. It was from Erin, one of my few friends who had stayed in touch despite everything. She had always been there for me, even when I kept my distance from everyone else. "You will not believe what's happening," she texted me, followed by a voice memo. I listened to it, trying to brace myself for whatever she was about to say. "Oh my God, Emily, they're freaking out. The cake didn't show up, no flowers, the venue is a mess, the staff is running around like chickens with their heads cut off. They don't have enough tables, it's a disaster. Marjorie is screaming at everyone and Nina is crying in the bridal suite. They're calling everyone, including you. They're desperate." I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. I wasn't glad that things were falling apart for them, But the sense of vindication was there. They had used me, dismissed me, and expected me to just take it. Now they were facing the consequences. A few minutes later, I got another message from Aaron. "Clive's called me twice already. He's freaking out. What do you want me to do?" I didn't reply. What could I say? Nothing I could do would fix their mess. About an hour later, I got a screenshot from Aaron of a group chat that included my dad, Marjorie, and a couple of other relatives. Marjorie: "We still need someone to cover the flower deposit. Ask Isolde. Don't bring up the invite thing, it'll just make it messy." Clive: "She'll probably say yes if we spin it like helping Nina. Nina's emotional, you know how she is." Marjorie: "Yeah, whatever, just tell her it's about family. She'll bite." I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. They didn't even have the decency to make it sound sincere. They were treating me like a transaction, like a means to an end. Not once did anyone acknowledge how they had treated me. Not once did anyone say, "I'm sorry," or "We've made a mistake." It hit me then. This wasn't just a wedding, this was about control. They had been using me, and they thought they could keep doing it, with no consequences. I wasn't even a person to them. I was a resource, a financial backup they could pull from whenever they needed. I read the message over and over, the sting of it settling deeper and deeper. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. They had crossed a line, and it was time to close this chapter once and for all. I didn't respond to Aaron. I didn't want to engage in their drama. Instead, I did something I had never imagined I would do. I went through the motions of canceling everything. The venue deposit, the catering, the cake, the floral arrangements, everything I had agreed to fund was now gone. I pulled out the email I had sent earlier in the week confirming my withdrawal from the wedding payments and clicked send one more time. I sent it to the event coordinator with the subject line, "Final decision, cancellation of all payments for Voss wedding." There was no apology, no regret, just a final, unyielding decision to stand my ground. Hours passed, and the day wore on. I knew things were probably falling apart for them in a way I couldn't imagine, but I didn't care. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with them. Then came another message. This time, it was from my dad. "Emily, what the hell did you do? You've humiliated us. The wedding is falling apart. People are asking where you are. Marjorie is losing it. This is bigger than just us. You're making everything worse. Please just help us. We're family." I let the message sit there for a while, letting the irony wash over me. He was still trying to spin this, still trying to make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. I didn't respond. That evening I went out for a walk. It was quiet, the streets bathed in golden light as the sun began to set. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't feel like I was chasing approval from people who would never see me for who I truly was. But the quiet didn't last. Just as I was about to head home, I checked my phone one last time, and there it was, another message from Nina. It was short and simple. "You've ruined everything. You were supposed to be there. I thought you were my sister, but now you've made everything worse." I didn't even blink. I closed the message without a second thought. I had nothing left to give them. Nothing. The next morning, I woke up to more notifications. This time, it was a link to a GoFundMe page. "Help Nina recover from her ruined wedding. A sister's betrayal," the title read. There was a photo of Nina, looking devastated, holding her bouquet, eyes red from crying. Beneath the photo, a description painted me as the villain, someone who had sabotaged the wedding out of jealousy, as if I was the one who had been uninvited and treated like an outsider for years. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. How could they do this? How could they twist the story so completely? But as I read the comments on the GoFundMe page, I knew. The narrative was already set. "Sorry this happened to you, Nina. Emily was always the problem." Families should support each other. I can't believe she did this. Bitter spinster ruining her sister's happiness. So sad. I didn't engage. I didn't respond to a single comment. They could twist the story however they wanted. I had learned long ago that I couldn't change their version of events. They had already decided who I was in their eyes, and no amount of explaining would change that. So I did what I should have done years ago. I blocked them all. I blocked Nina, I blocked my dad, and I blocked Margaret. I shut that chapter of my life for good. I didn't need them. I never needed them. The days after I cut them off were quieter than I ever imagined they would be. At first, I expected a flood of emotions to overwhelm me. Guilt, regret, maybe even anger. But the silence? It was oddly peaceful. It was as if the noise I had been carrying around for years had suddenly faded away. I threw myself into my work. For the first time in months, I felt completely immersed in it. The designs, the branding projects, the logos, I no longer resented them for not being the big dreams I thought I wanted. They were my escape, my refuge. The client calls kept coming in, and I responded with enthusiasm I hadn't felt in a long time. Each project, no matter how small, felt like a small victory. The emails started to pile up. People acknowledging my work, expressing how happy they were with what I had created. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something real, something I could be proud of. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the last few weeks lift off my shoulders. It felt good to be out of that toxic environment, to be free of people who treated me as if I was only useful when I could provide something for them. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone anymore. A few weeks passed in a haze of work and quiet nights spent reading, listening to music, and enjoying my own company. And just when I thought I could finally let go of everything, when I felt like the storm had passed, I got another text. It was from Erin, the friend who had kept me grounded through all of this. She had been following everything, even though I had tried to shut everyone out. "You're not going to believe this," she texted. "Nain's asking Clive and Marjorie to sell their Lexus. She burned through all the wedding money, and now she wants them to foot the bill for her grad school. Can you believe it?" Ha ha ha, I didn't even have to read the rest. The absurdity of it made me laugh. A dry, bitter laugh. Of course she was. Of course it was never going to end. No matter how much money they had thrown at that wedding, no matter how many times they used me as their financial backup, it would never be enough. A few minutes later, Erin sent me another message. Marjorie said no, of course, but now Nina is really flipping out. She called them selfish, and she said you owe her. She said you took away her happy day. I shook my head, a hollow feeling in my chest. It didn't surprise me, not anymore. I didn't respond to Erin. I didn't feel like talking about them anymore. I didn't feel the need to explain myself or even defend my actions. They had done enough to me already. I had learned my lesson. As much as I had once hoped for closure, now, I understood it wasn't something I would ever get from them. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need them to understand what I had gone through, because the truth was, I had already forgiven myself. I had let go of the idea that my worth was tied to their acceptance. I was enough. I had always been enough. And the more I stood by that truth, the more I felt myself coming alive again. The next day, I booked a flight to Portland. I wasn't running away, but I needed something new, a fresh start. The city had always called to me with its quirky neighborhoods and laid-back atmosphere. It felt like a place where I could finally find peace. I packed my bags slowly, savoring the act of closing a chapter. I left behind the city, the apartment, and the memories of a family I had fought so hard to fit into. There was nothing left for me there. I was going to build something different, something better, for myself. I arrived in Portland a few days later. I rented a small sublet near Alberta Street, a cozy place where the windows let in soft light and the smell of fresh coffee wafted from the cafe downstairs. The energy in the city was different. It was more my pace, quiet, introspective, yet full of possibility. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't need to. I wasn't running from my past, I was stepping into my future. And I was doing it on my terms. I spent the first few weeks exploring the city, finding little pockets of peace in between coffee shops and bookstores. I started taking ceramics classes on Thursdays. Nothing fancy, just clay under my fingertips and a wheel that spun until my thoughts caught up with my hands. I loved how it felt to make something from scratch, how the pieces didn't always turn out perfect, but they were still mine. It wasn't about making a masterpiece, it was about creating something that was whole, even when it wasn't perfect. And I understood now that that was what I had to do with my life. I had to be whole, even if I wasn't perfect. I started waking up early every morning, making coffee before the sun rose, and enjoying the stillness. There were no unanswered texts, no missed calls. There was no dread when my phone buzzed. It felt like freedom, real, tangible freedom. A few weeks in, I got a message from Erin. I had almost forgotten about the wedding aftermath by this point, but she had been keeping me in the loop. "You won't believe this," she said. "Someone flagged Nina's GoFundMe. The neighbors are speaking out about how shady it all looks. Some of them even called it manipulation." I smiled to myself, knowing I didn't need to be involved in the drama anymore. It didn't concern me. It didn't matter. A few weeks after I settled into my new life in Portland, I thought the storm had passed. I was building something for myself, feeling grounded in ways I hadn't before. No more unanswered calls from my father, no more manipulative messages from Nina. It was just me, my work, and the quiet hum of life that seemed to finally be moving at a pace I could handle. But, as it always happens with unresolved endings, a new message came through one morning. The notification lit up on my phone. I didn't recognize the number, but it was from Nina. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just delete it. The last time I spoke to her was in that brief, cruel text message she sent, an ultimatum that confirmed everything I had suspected about our relationship. She didn't want me there, and I had no reason to keep waiting for an apology that would never come. But curiosity, no, maybe it was just a bad habit, pushed me to open it. I read the first few lines. "Emily, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I just want to say I'm sorry. I know I hurt you. I should have never said the things I did, and I regret it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I was wrong." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had gotten so used to the absence of anything genuine from her, so used to being the villain in this family's narrative, that her apology felt like a sudden wave of cold water. "I was just so upset," Nina continued in the message. "I was trying to have everything perfect, and I thought if I just pushed everyone to do things my way, it would be easier. I didn't realize what I was doing to you. I didn't realize how I was treating you." I sat still for a long time, the phone in my hands. It was like everything I had felt over the last few months, the anger, the hurt, the betrayal, was bubbling back up to the surface. Part of me wanted to reply right away, to tell her everything I had kept inside, to let her know exactly how I had been treated all these years. But another part of me, the part that had been slowly rebuilding itself, stopped me. This wasn't about me anymore. This wasn't about fighting to be seen by people who had already made up their minds about who I was. This wasn't about forcing a reconciliation that I didn't need. It was about letting go for good. I took a deep breath, put the phone down, and stared out the window of my new apartment. The light was soft, casting shadows across the floor as the wind rustled the trees outside. The city felt quiet, distant, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged in it. There was no place in my life anymore for guilt, no place for second-guessing myself. I had made my decision. The space I had created for myself in Portland wasn't just a physical one, it was emotional too. I had closed the door on that chapter of my life, and I wasn't going to walk back through it. I blocked Nina's number. There was no dramatic final confrontation, no heated argument, just the soft click of a button as I moved on. I wasn't doing it out of spite, but out of necessity. The life I was building for myself in Portland didn't have room for people who didn't see me for who I truly was. People who would use me until I was drained, and then erase me when I no longer fit into their version of family. I spent the rest of the day thinking about everything I had gone through. The past few months, the months leading up to the wedding, the years before that. And I realized something important. I had spent so much of my life chasing a family that had never really been mine, trying to prove my worth to people who would never accept me the way I was. But the truth was, I wasn't the problem. They were. The next morning I woke up with a sense of finality. I no longer felt the weight of their judgment, their manipulation. I was free. I spent the day in a local bookstore, wandering through the aisles, picking up a book here and there. I found one that caught my eye, a book on resilience and self-empowerment. I bought it, walked outside, and sat at a cafe with a cup of coffee, reading in peace. For the first time in so long, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was focused on what I was gaining. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was the presence of peace. Weeks passed, and I started to embrace the new rhythm of my life. I found joy in the simple things, the morning walks, the friendly nods from strangers, the quiet moments of reflection. I found joy in myself. Then, one day, I received a message from my old college roommate, Sarah. We hadn't spoken in years, but she had heard about what had happened with my family and she reached out to check on me. "Hey Emily, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I just wanted to say, I'm really proud of you. I know things haven't been easy with your family, but you've done the hardest thing, putting yourself first. I admire that so much." I smiled at the message, feeling a warmth spread through me. I hadn't expected validation from anyone, but hearing it from someone who knew me well, someone who had seen me at my best and my worst, felt like a small victory. I realized that the family I had spent so much of my life trying to build didn't need to be blood. It was the people who cared for me when I had nothing left to give. It was the friends who checked in on me without expecting anything in return. The people who understood that sometimes silence isn't avoidance. It's healing. As I walked back to my apartment that evening, the weight of the past no longer seemed so heavy. It was still there, of course, a scar I would carry for a long time, but it wasn't a wound anymore. It was a reminder of how far I had come. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I was enough just as I was, and that was all that mattered. It's funny how life works sometimes. You spend so much time looking for something outside of yourself, thinking it's what you need to feel whole, but the truth is, the real change, the real shift, comes when you stop searching and just start living. The more time I spent in Portland, the more I realized how much I had been holding on to the past. Holding on to the idea of family, to the hope that maybe, just maybe, they would one day see me for who I truly was. But the truth was, I didn't need them to. I didn't need their validation or approval to know my worth. One day, after a few weeks of adjusting to my new life, I got an email that made me pause for a second. It was from a local high school, inviting me to speak at a community session about resilience, identity, and selfhood in complex family dynamics. The invitation felt like it came at the perfect moment. They had heard about my story somehow, probably through a mutual connection, and thought my experience could help others who were struggling with similar issues. At first I hesitated. The idea of sharing my story with strangers, laying myself bare in front of an audience, seemed intimidating. But then I realized something. I had already shared it with myself. I had already been through the worst of it. The hardest part of my journey wasn't telling people what happened, it was acknowledging it for myself. I accepted the invitation. The event was a small gathering in the school auditorium, but it was filled with energy and hope. As I sat in the front row, waiting for my turn to speak, I could feel my nerves creeping up. But when I stood up and stepped to the microphone, something in me clicked. I began by telling my story, not as a victim, not as someone who had been wronged, but as someone who had fought to find herself in the midst of chaos. I spoke about the family I had tried to belong to, the wounds they had left on me, and the strength I found in walking away. I told them about the peace I had found in being alone, in creating a life that was mine, one that wasn't defined by anyone else's expectations. And then I shared the most important lesson I had learned. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to show up for you, the ones who lift you up when you fall, who don't expect anything in return. And sometimes, family is about choosing yourself when no one else will. The room was silent when I finished. I could see the faces in the crowd, some nodding, others wiping their eyes. It wasn't just my story that resonated with them, it was the truth behind it. They saw themselves in what I had said. And in that moment, I realized that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt like an outsider, anyone who had ever been told they weren't enough. Afterward, a few students came up to talk to me, sharing their own experiences. Some of them had family struggles, some had been abandoned by loved ones, but they all had one thing in common. They were fighting to reclaim their power just like I had, and that in itself felt like a victory. Later that night, I sat by the window in my apartment, the city lights flickering outside. I felt at peace, grounded in a way I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the event that had given me closure. It was everything I had learned along the way, the ability to walk away from what wasn't serving me, the strength to forgive myself for the parts of me that I had been ashamed of, the courage to stand up for myself, even when it meant cutting ties with the people I once thought would always be there. And most importantly, I had learned to trust myself. The next few months passed in a blur of work, new friends, and quiet moments of self-reflection. I took a trip to the coast, spent a weekend hiking in the mountains, and discovered a new love for painting. I didn't have to be anyone else. I could just be Emily. One evening, while walking home from a local cafe, I bumped into a familiar face. It was Erin, the friend who had been there for me through the chaos, the one who had kept me grounded when everything else felt like it was falling apart. "Emily," she called out, waving, "how's the new life treating you?" I smiled. "It's treating me well. It's exactly what I needed." She raised an eyebrow, her smile wide. "You look different. Lighter." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I am. I finally let go of everything I didn't need, and for the first time, I feel like I'm living for me." Erin laughed, her voice light and full of warmth. "I'm glad you're here, Em. You deserve this." I nodded again, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. I didn't need to keep proving anything. I had already found what I needed. Myself. And that was enough. Life, after all the chaos, had settled into a rhythm I never thought possible. When I first arrived in Portland, I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought I'd just be running away from my problems, trying to find some semblance of peace in a new city. But what I found was so much more. I found myself. As I got deeper into my work and more comfortable in my new life, something began to shift. It wasn't just the quiet peace of being alone, though that was part of it. It wasn't just the satisfaction of independence or the joy of starting over. It was the realization that I had finally let go of the expectations of others, those who had never truly seen me, and that, in doing so, I was free to live on my terms. I found a small studio to rent in the city. It had the kind of charm I always dreamed about: exposed brick walls, huge windows with plenty of natural light, and a little balcony that overlooked a street where people walked by with their dogs and children. It wasn't a big apartment, but it was mine. I could paint if I wanted to, work if I needed to, or just sit quietly and let my thoughts wander. And that space, it was a reflection of my new beginning. It wasn't filled with the ghosts of past expectations or past people. It was simply a space for me to grow. One afternoon, while I was out running errands, I ran into someone who had been a part of my past in a way I didn't expect. It was Clive, my father's new wife's ex-husband, the man who had been married to Margaret before my father. We hadn't spoken since the wedding fiasco, and honestly, I didn't expect to ever see him again. I wasn't sure what to expect when I saw him standing on the corner, looking just as out of place as I felt in that moment. But as I walked closer, I noticed he wasn't angry or even uncomfortable. His face softened when he saw me. "Emily," he said, his voice a little surprised but not unfriendly. "Clive," I said, giving him a tight smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." He chuckled. "Yeah, well, I've been around, trying to sort things out, my own way." I raised an eyebrow, curious but wary. "What do you mean by that?" He hesitated, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as if unsure how to approach the conversation. "Look, Emily, I've been thinking about things lately, about how I treated you, about how things went down with the wedding. I owe you an apology." I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "I don't know if I ever really understood what was going on, or if I just ignored it," Clive said, his voice softer now. "I didn't get it, how you were treated, and honestly, I didn't stand up for you when I should have. You were left out, and I didn't do anything about it." For a moment, all I could do was stare at him. I had spent so much time letting that hurt fester, wondering if he even cared enough to notice how much I was suffering. But now, standing there with him in the middle of the street, I realized something. This apology didn't matter as much as I thought it would, because the truth was, I didn't need it. I didn't need him to fix what had been broken. I had already done that for myself. "Clive, I appreciate the apology," I said slowly, "but I'm past it. I don't need you or anyone else to fix it for me. I've learned how to do that on my own." He looked at me, his expression shifting, almost as if he were seeing me for the first time. "I get that, I do, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I should have been there for you." I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "Thank you, Clive. I'm doing fine now. I really am." We stood there for a moment, the city noise buzzing in the background, before he gave me a small wave and turned to leave. I watched him walk away, feeling a strange sense of closure. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was just two people who had been part of each other's past, acknowledging the hurt and moving on. That's when it hit me. I had already moved on. It wasn't just about cutting ties with my family or running away from the hurt. It was about taking the power back, about choosing not to let people define who I was, and refusing to stay in situations that only served to diminish me. And for the first time, I realized that I was truly at peace with all of it. The scars, the pain, the heartbreak, everything that had been part of my journey had brought me here, to a life I could be proud of. A life where I was free to choose my own family, my own path. I spent the rest of the evening walking through the city, my heart light and my mind clear. The world felt different now, not because anything had changed outside of me, but because I had changed. I wasn't looking for anyone else's approval anymore. I didn't need to seek validation from the people who had once made me feel small. I had learned to love myself, to trust myself, and to stand firm in the truth that I was enough. And that was all I would ever need.